Okay, we're reviewing our basic trig, so we know that we remember our basic trig functions with what mnemonic? Everyone. SOHCAHTOA. SOHCAHTOA. Now, let's go ahead and make sure that we remember what everything represents in our mnemonic. We know that the S represents what trig function? Sine. Very good. The C represents cosine. Very good. T represents the tangent. And then we have the pieces that make these up. So we have O, A, and H. O stands for the opposite. And it's the side that doesn't touch the angle in question. H stands for hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse doesn't touch which angle? The right angle, the largest angle. And then A stands for adjacent, and that's just the third side. It's just whatever side is left after you've identified opposite and hypotenuse. Now don't forget, no matter what calculator you're using, what mode do we have to be in? Degree mode. If you're not in degree mode, you will get the incorrect answer. Degrees are your units. It's like the difference between feet and centimeters. Or inches and centimeters. I'm 60 inches tall. I'm not 60 centimeters. So if I had put it in a different unit, I would never have the correct answer. Have to be in degree mode. Okay, our first step for these basic trig problems is to identify the trig function. Very good. And we have three basic trig functions. What are they? Sine, cosine, and tangent. Very good. So let's go down to problem 22. And we'll start out by highlighting the two sides of our right angle, which tells me that my hypotenuse is what? 10. Now I'm going to shade the two sides of the angle in question. Angle in question here is 29 degrees. And this tells me that the opposite is x. That means the blank side is the adjacent. Now, notice that I circled the two sides that we have information about. We have information about what two sides? H and O, or O and H. So we go back up here and we look at our SOHCAHTOA. Which one has OH together? So, which represents what function? Sine. So we're going to use the sine function. We know that sine is opposite over the hypotenuse. We know our angle in question is 29 degrees. What is our opposite in this problem? X. And what is our hypotenuse? 10. Very good. So our next step, the easiest way to solve this is to set up a what? A proportion. In order to make this a proportion, we need to make this a fraction because a proportion is two fractions that equal to one another. So I can put this over what? 1, because anything divided by 1 is itself. So we don't change the value. How do we solve a proportion? cross multiply. So the last step is simply to solve. So in this problem, when we cross multiply, we get 1 times x, which is x, and we get 10 times what? The sine of 29 degrees. Make sure you're in degree mode. Make sure you are in degree mode. So you need degrees highlighted. You need to punch this in your calculator. You have 10 times the sine of 29 degrees. And we are asked to round to the nearest tenth. So that's how many decimal places? 1. So we get 4.8. So x is approximately 4.8. Okay, on problem 23, let's go back up to our steps. First of all, we need to identify the trig function. So we're going to highlight the two sides of our right angle to find the hypotenuse. I know that my hypotenuse is x. I have information about it, so I circled it. I'm going to highlight the two sides of my angle in question in order to find my opposite. So my opposite is 16, which means the blank side is my adjacent. I had information about O and H. So once again, we go back up to our SOHCAHTOA. Which one has O and H together? The SO. So I'm going to use sine once again. So this time I have O over H is equal to the sine. How many degrees this time? 65 degrees is equal to, what is my opposite? 16. What is my hypotenuse? X. Very good. I need to set up a what? Proportion. I'm going to do what next? Cross multiply. So I have 1 times 16 is 16. Then I have x times the sine of 65 degrees. Do I have x by itself currently? No. What's happening to x right now? It's being multiplied by what? The sine of 65 degrees. So that means I need to do the opposite. I need to undo that. What undoes multiplication? Division. So I need to divide both sides by what? The sine of 65 degrees. So these cancel out. So I'm left with x is equal to 16 divided by the sine of 65 degrees. I'm going to punch that in my calculator. 16 divided by the sine of 65 degrees is equal to, we want to round to the nearest tenth, so 1 decimal place is going to round to 17 point what? 7, because that's a 6, 6 rounds up. Okay, for problem number 24, we start out and we highlight the two sides of the right angle. That tells me, Kyle, what side is my hypotenuse? It tells me, everyone, that what side is my hypotenuse? 15 is my hypotenuse. Now I'm going to shade the two sides of the angle in question, which in this case is 55 degrees, and that tells me that which side is my opposite? Blank or x? Blank is my opposite, which means x is my adjacent. So I'm going to circle it because I have information about it. So I have information about what two sides? my adjacent and my hypotenuse. So we go back up to our SOHCAHTOA. Which one has adjacent and hypotenuse? Cosine. Cosine is adjacent divided by hypotenuse. So we're going to fill this out with the cosine, which we know is adjacent over hypotenuse. We've got the cosine of how many degrees? 55 degrees is equal to, what is my adjacent? X. What is my hypotenuse? 15. Now remember, the easiest way to solve these is to set up a what? Proportion. So I'm going to put this over. Now I'm going to do what? Cross multiply. So when I cross multiply, I get 1 times x, which is x. X equals 15 times the cosine of 55 degrees. Always make sure you're in degree mode. Always make sure you're in degree mode. I do expect you to write this step on your paper. So this is the type of work that I expect to see on your paper. You're going to punch in your calculator 15 times the cosine of 55 degrees. We're in degree mode. And we get x is approximately, and we were told to round to the nearest tenth. So x is approximately how much? 8.6. X is approximately 8.6. Okay, for problem 25, once again, we start off by highlighting the two sides of our right angle in order to determine our hypotenuse. So shading this tells me that my hypotenuse is how much? X. I have information about it, so I circled it. Okay, now I'm going to shade the two sides of my angle in question. And that tells me that my opposite is blank, which means 16 is my adjacent. Very good. Adjacent and hypotenuse make cosine. So we have the cosine of what? 39 degrees is equal to, what is my adjacent? 16. What is my hypotenuse? X. When I cross multiply, I get 1 times 16 is 16. 16 equals x times the cosine of 39 degrees. Do I have x by itself? No. So what do I have to do? Divide both sides of the equation by what? The cosine of 39 degrees. These cancel out. So when I punch it in my calculator, make sure you punch it in correctly. So you have to do 16 divided by the cosine, regular cosine, of 39 degrees, rounded to the nearest tenth. This is how much? 20.6. Okay, on problem number 26, when we highlight the two sides of the right angle, we find out that our hypotenuse is blank. Then we highlight the two sides of the angle in question, which here is 61 degrees. We find out that our opposite is x, which means 15 has to be our adjacent. SOHCAHTOA, that tells me that O and A make tangent. Opposite over adjacent is equal to the tangent of an angle. In this case, it's 61 degrees. My opposite is x. My adjacent is 15. We know that we're going to set up a proportion. When we cross multiply, we get 1 times x is x, and x is equal to 15 times the tangent of 61 degrees. So on our calculator, we just punch in 15 times the tangent, make sure you're in degree mode, 61 degrees, and to the nearest tenth, that rounds to 27.1, because this rounds up, since that's 0.6. 0.6 rounds up to 0.1. So x is approximately 27.1. Okay, on problem 27, when I highlight the two sides of the right angle, I find that my hypotenuse is blank. When I highlight the two sides of the angle in question, it tells me that my opposite is 16, which means my adjacent is x. I have information about opposite and adjacent, which tells me that I'm dealing with tangent once again. So I have the tangent of 54 degrees is equal to opposite, which is 16, over my adjacent, which is x. We know to set up a proportion. So when I cross multiply, I get 1 times 16 is 16, which is equal to x times the tangent of 54 degrees. I don't have x by itself yet. X is being multiplied by the tangent of 54 degrees. So to undo that, I have to divide both sides of my equation by the tangent of 54 degrees. These cancel out, which tells me that x is exactly equal to 16 divided by the tangent of 54 degrees. I'm going to punch that in my calculator. 16 divided by the tangent of 54 degrees. Rounded to the nearest tenth, that tells me that x is approximately 11.5.